Well, let's continue the campaign coverage now with a focus on British Columbia. Jas Johal was a cabinet minister in the Christy Clark government. Before that, he was a local, then national reporter with Global News. These days, he hosts the Jas Johal Show on CKNW Radio in Vancouver. Jas, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Good to see you as well, Michael. Looking forward to this chat. Lots to talk about.
Yeah, lots to talk about. I think it's worthwhile to start big picture here because, when the year started out, we were still talking about a Conservative majority if and when an election was called. Fast forward 11 weeks, we're now in a campaign. The polls are showing the Liberals are running neck and neck with Conservatives now. That's a national trend being reflected in British Columbia as well. Jas, when you speak to British Columbians, I'm wondering what they're saying, what people in the Lower Mainland are saying about why this race has now tightened up.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. If you had asked me this question just a few months ago, we were talking about potentially 1 to 3 seats for the federal Liberals here in British Columbia, the chances that they would actually hold them. Now we're looking at 15 to 17, potentially 18 seats for the federal Liberals. And what's happened is Donald Trump. Now, British Columbia, compared to most other provinces, aren't as exposed to the U.S. market. About 54% of our export trade goes to the U.S. compared to, let's say, 80 or 90% for some provinces. So we are not as exposed, but certainly Donald Trump's comments, his over-the-top comments, have certainly scared British Columbia, just as they've scared many Canadians. And as we wait for the potential tariffs to come in early April, there's lots of industries here in British Columbia which could be heavily impacted. Softwood lumber, which would impact many communities here in our suburbs, but particularly in the interior and north. Our agriculture industry in our Fraser Valley could be heavily impacted as well. So like most Canadians, people are now looking at Donald Trump and who is best to respond to Donald Trump as the ballot question. Now, lots that will occur over the next 4 or 5 weeks in this election campaign. But Donald Trump's shadow looms large here in British Columbia. And that is impacting certainly what people are thinking about in terms of who they're going to vote for. And it changed significantly, certainly here in Metro Vancouver, where 55% of the residents of British Columbia actually live.
Yeah, absolutely. But, now that the Liberals are gaining ground, and as you say, much like the rest of the country, it's really a response to concerns of what's happening south of the border. What does that mean then, Jas, when it comes to the NDP and Greens? Because, those parties, historically, they have been able to rely on British Columbia to help out their numbers as compared to other regions of the country. What's the situation with those two parties right now?
We keep talking about the Conservatives and Liberals in the front-runner race, but you ask a very good question. I think one of the themes of this story is what's going to happen to the NDP. Very interesting things happening here in British Columbia. In the urban core, a lot of seats that many thought would go Conservative now have the potential to go Liberal. Why? It's the NDP voter that is saying, I don't want Pierre Poilievre in, and I'm willing to vote Liberal this time, even though I'm a traditional NDP voter. And that is to put a lot of seats in play now here in Metro Vancouver. It's also meant veteran members of Parliament for the NDP. Think Dan Davies, Peter Julian. Not that I'm saying they're going to lose, but their fight is going to be a lot tougher now in some of these traditional NDP ridings. So in the urban core, the NDP is bleeding votes to the Liberals at this moment. What's very interesting also is what's happening in rural communities, particularly on Vancouver Island, where you're seeing sort of a replay of the 1990s, where you had that traditional blue-collar NDP voter that was a member probably of a private sector union. Well, they moved to reform in the 1990s. And since then, they've moved back. But we're seeing the same phenomenon once again, where you got blue-collar, small-town, private sector union members now voting potentially for the Conservatives. So the NDP is losing votes, not just on from the Liberal side, but also to the Conservatives as well. So I've heard talk of potentially Jagmeet Singh not being able to hold his seat. Still lots of time, don't get me wrong. But the NDP are struggling on the left and the right flank. And I've heard, them holding potentially even 1 to 3 seats. So this is a fight for their lives, certainly here in British Columbia.
Yeah, a really interesting trend when you lay it out like that, Jas. Listen, let's also talk about Gregor Robertson, of course, former mayor of Vancouver, just announced the fact that he will be running for the Liberals in the riding of Vancouver, Fraserview, South Burnaby. What does that do to the morale of the Liberals and also the other parties that are trying to gain ground in the Lower Mainland?
Well, I think it's a shot in the arm for the Liberals. Anytime you bring in a high-profile candidate. It fires up the team. It speaks the ability of the party to attract big names. And, whether you vote for Gregor Roberts or not, you know what he stands for. He's a big proponent of big cities playing a role in the fight against climate change. He also provides the Liberals a certain protection from the left-wing flank of their party. Now, the Prime Minister Carney's already said he is getting rid of, or has gotten rid of, the consumer carbon tax. They still need to speak to that center-left part of their party. And I think with the addition of Gregor Robertson, it actually provides them with some protection, and it says to voters, look, we still care about climate change. This is a big issue for Canadians, especially urban Canadians. And guys like Gregor Robertson are going to be advocating for that and advocating for fighting climate change with policies, and that's a good thing. So it's a shot in the arm for them. It's not the be-all and end-all, of course, but the question is, at the end of the day, if it's about Donald Trump, well, it's helpful for the Liberals. But I would say one thing, that doesn't matter if you have Gregor Robertson or not, the support for the Liberals, I would argue, is still soft. This could change. Canadians are kicking the tires. They think they like what they see, but they haven't made that final decision. So there's a caveat there, and I would not remotely count the Conservatives out.
Yeah, absolutely. As they say, campaigns matter, and this one is going to matter even more. So listen, let's talk a little bit about Christy Clark before we're done. Of course, your former boss, continues to be speculation as to whether or not she is going to jump in for the Liberals. Any insights there?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. There are two types of thinking. There's those who say, look, you got a former premier, a great retail politician who connects well with voters. And her core base, they would argue, isn't Vancouver, where she lives. It's actually the suburbs of Vancouver. Remember, 25% of the Lower Mainland actually lives in Vancouver. 75% of us actually live in the suburbs. And I think Christy Clark and her supporters view that's her core base. So she is potentially being considered for two ridings, both in the fast-growing community of Surrey, which will soon pass Vancouver in population. The challenge is, with internal polling, from what I'm hearing, is the Liberals are realizing the party polls ahead of Christy Clark. Too many voters still view her as too polarizing, and that's part of the challenge. She has gotten involved in the Conservative leadership race not too long ago in supporting Jean Charest. I'm not sure what Liberals will make of that. So there is some hesitation. Those who say, look, this is a former premier, of course we should take her. And there's those who say she's very polarizing, number one, and that may jeopardize voters for us. And number two, NDP voters, the ones that we want to attract, that will help us get back into the game, will not appreciate us nominating or announcing her as a candidate, even in the suburbs. So that is the internal conversation and debate. There's a to and fro. And I would argue the national folks in the party like the idea of a former premier running. The local folks who have a better sense of the game here, the ground game, and have done polling, say, look, she's going to be too polarizing. She's not the person you need. We can find somebody else. So very interesting drama, behind-the-scenes drama going on as you and I speak. I'm not sure what will come of it. Negotiations are ongoing, but that's some of the secondary drama that's out there. And there's a lot of other seats that still are waiting for candidates to be nominated, but that one especially is one to watch.
Okay, well, and we are watching, and we'll reach out again. But for now, Jas Johal, appreciate the time. Really good to see you again. Thank you for this.
Hey, likewise. Good to chat.